Okay, there's record and the announcement. So this is Plato's Republic, week 4, winter 2020, and the date is the 3rd of August. And we're still in lockdown. Remember that, guys. We're suffering. If you're watching this in 2 years' time.
And curfew.
And curfew.
Yeah.
That was called a state of extreme
Emergency and
disaster.
Yes, yeah.
Emergency was last week.
Yeah, emergency.
Yeah, and we're still smiling and we're still talking about Plato. Amazing. All right. Okay, so I'll give you a bit of a summary first of where we've got to so far. And so if you can turn your mics off, unless you want to butt in. Okay, so let's just go back to where Socrates makes this outrageous claim that his republic should be ruled by philosophers. So that brought up the question, what is a philosopher? And he answers this question by taking us down into the theory of forms, because philosophers should focus on the forms. So this is where we go back again, as we did in the Phaedo, to the discussion of this kind of key theory, central theory in Plato. So philosophers are orientated towards the forms. So they're, as we've been saying, looking up rather than looking down, and they're looking up to the essential nature of things. They can see in sensible things their participation in the form. So remember the participation stuff, where you see in sensible things how they participate, the forms which are their essence of being. And so most folks are orientated towards sensible things and just beautiful objects rather than essential beauty, or just things rather than justice in itself. And so they're looking down, and this looking up, looking down will actually twist around to turning around today, because that's actually the wording he uses here, which is quite interesting. They can only see the manifestations. They actually focus on the manifestations and can't really see the forms. So they take for what resembles the real to be what is real. And he says that they're blind to the essences in which these things partake. And he says they're like dreamers. But what we need in our leaders is we need them to be wide awake so they can see reality in itself. Okay, and so this is where he introduces this idea of knowledge and opinion, or comes from the word doxa. And so he gives this kind of scale where you have ignorance, which is about what's absolutely not. Knowledge is about what absolutely is, which is the forms. And then belief or opinion, doxa, is kind of in between, kind of mixed up. And this mixed up idea of what is real is thinking that the sensible is the extent of what is real. So his definition of the philosopher then. So he defines it in opposition to the lover of belief. The philodoxy, or doxa, are those that love beautiful sounds, beautiful things, but not beauty in itself. The lover of wisdom, the philosopher, loves the absolute form of beauty. So in the case of the Republic, it's like the absolute form of justice. So when you're thinking about what is the just society, and if you're looking at governing the society, you'd be looking towards the idea of justice and trying to make your society correspond as much as it can with that idea. Right, and so then we'll remember last week how they cut into the dialogue. Plato cuts in with a critique of the Socratic method. And so one of the participants in the discussion says that, oh, you know, Socrates keeps asking leading questions and he traps you into saying what you don't believe, and actually what is contrary to the facts. And the point he raises, the point at issue here, is Socrates' proposal that a good and just society can come about if the philosophers are rulers. Whereas in fact, those who spend most of their time in philosophy become really strange and are often utterly depraved, as he says. Even the best of them are still completely useless to the state. He can't see any way in which philosophers could be of use to the state, so why should they be rulers? So it doesn't make sense. Surprisingly, Socrates agrees and says, yes, philosophers are depraved and useless to the state, and yet they should be rulers. And then it's sort of like, well, how can we make sense of this? There seems to be a contradiction. And this is segue into this allegorical section, which we're now in and we're about to go deeper into. So he says that in order to explain what I'm explaining, and it's quite difficult, I need to use images. And then someone says, well, hang on a sec, aren't you against images like representational art and that? And he says, oh, well, I've got to use everything I can, you know, to get my point across because it's quite hard. And so it's sort of like when the playwright invents the stag goat, a mythical creature that's part one and part the other. You know, I've got to use logical argument and imagery as well. So it's not all, as we've said before, it's not all about reason. It's not all about reason getting to the truth. And we'll really get into that this time where very much what he's trying to get across, he says, is beyond reasoning, in fact, beyond expression in any normal way. So the first allegory was the allegory of the ship of state, where you have different groups fighting to take the wheel, to steer the boat. And those that are really those who really know how to steer, rather who know how to navigate, are derided by everyone else as stargazers. And this is a comparison with, as Socrates says, our present rulers. So in democratic Athens. So is it actually the stargazers, the philosophers who are useless, or is it the rulers who don't use philosophy, who don't use philosophers as navigators, who are useless? But anyway, there's hardly any true philosophers around to use, because those with the philosopher nature are corrupted and then replaced by pretenders to philosophy. So this is where we got into this stuff where he talked for a long time about the philosopher's nature and how some people have a good talent where they've got a good mix of skills and attributes that makes them good candidates, you know, to be philosopher rulers in the Republic if they get well educated. But what he says in our society, in the current society, is that the few that are born with this nature are destroyed by the society. So the philosopher nature is destroyed. And in fact, what happens is that those with this nature, through the education system that's around or through the cultural environment that's around, actually turn out to be worse in a bad society. So those that can do the most potential good in a good society, when corrupted, can do the most bad. And he then moves on with another image where he's describing specifically how the sophistic education and the kind of the education by individual sophists and in sophists in groups can be damaging. And he uses the allegory of the beast, that the crowd is the beast. And that really what happens in these discussions is that it's about pleasing the beast. And so appeasing the beast, in other words, pleasing the crowd, becomes a substitute for wisdom. And so what the beast likes is taken for what is good, and what the beast dislikes is taken for what is bad. So, pretty powerful. And so then at the end of last week, we got to the section where they're sort of saying, well, you know, this is a pretty bleak picture of current society, and how can we possibly transition to anything like this ideal society. So, and Socrates says, well, it's difficult, but not impossible. And so one of the ways that we can get there is by a philosopher becoming king, but also a king becoming a philosopher. And at this point last week, Maria mentioned that actually Plato in his life possibly actually took this path. There are some letters which I haven't mentioned of Plato, which we think are authentic. It's not absolutely sure. They're certainly very early. They're certainly from a period, if not from Plato, then from very early after Plato. But if we take them as authentic, then there's one letter, the 7th letter, that has some amazing stuff in it about the forms and about a lot of other things, including about Plato's life. And that describes where Plato went to Sicily, to the king there at the time. He was persuaded to go there. And I think Effie might have mentioned this too. I hope I'm giving the right credits here. And Plato tried to, Plato and Plato's friend Dion tried to, this king was supposedly interested in philosophy and tried to kind of do the whole philosopher king thing, but it all went very badly. You'll have to read the letter and find out about that. So yeah, that was a very good point. So it sort of shows that Plato was really interested in trying to implement in that way. Not so much to go straight for the tabula rasa, the blank slate, the revolution, but to do it in an incremental way with a contemporary king. All right, so that's where we got last week with the philosopher, the forms, with trying to implement practical ways of implementing it. So has anyone got any questions about that before we go on?
Can I make a comment that just came to mind now? You know, if we get good politicians, we often don't call them stargazers, but we call them villains because we can't accept what they're saying. So, you know, it's a bit tricky to think of the corrupted philosopher when often the good philosopher, the stargazer, is also looked at as corrupted because we can't see that he's not, or she is not. That's all.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, what's your criteria? And it's just coming up so much now on you know, with the big issues that are coming up in politics, I think, around, and people airing their views on social network. It's really hard to know what to believe. Who are the philosophers? Absolutely agree that this is a real difficult time. It's very hard to judge who's right.
I guess I'm surprised, given that Socrates was treated the way he was, that Plato doesn't talk about the good philosopher actually being looked at as a villain, and he only sees the good philosopher as a stargazer.
Right. Sorry, if we've lost you, you're on mute again.
So it's just surprising that Plato doesn't suggest that we're going to see the good philosopher as a villain, but we're going to see him as a stargazer. Because I think as a society, we miss it and we get threatened by the good philosopher, like we did with Socrates.
Yeah, well, he does mention that, and I did leave it out this time, but I think in this section and in other sections, he makes very clear references to what happened to Socrates, that Socrates was portrayed as the villain and taken before the courts and killed, yeah. And there is a reference in this section to that, which I didn't mention this time. Yeah. So anyone else before we go on? All right. Okay. So let's go into the divided line. All right. Now, should I put my share screen up now? Maybe I will. Okay, let me do this again. Why have I got two here? Let's try that one. Okay, can people see that? Oh, hang on. Have I got my mute on?
I can hear you.
Yep, we can see it. Looks good.
Oh, okay, it's coming up okay? All right, good. Okay, all right. Okay, so now in this section here, the first part you're reading, I don't know whether you notice this kind of build up to this kind of heightened teaching. It's the build up to introducing the form of forms. So the discussion returns to the education of the guardians, and then introduces the ultimate goal. The first time it's mentioned, I think it's called the Great Lesson. The Greek is Magister Mathemata, so the great mathematics, but mathematics really just meant the teaching or the lesson. Mathematics had a general meaning there. So this is something that is greater than justice. So we're talking about the philosophers focusing on justice and the form of beauty, the form of justice and all these forms, but this is like the form of forms. And then he introduces it as the form of the good. It's given other names elsewhere. People presume he's referring to the same thing, but in this case, it's a form of the good, which is above the form of justice or any other forms. And he says that everything else is useless without it. Guardians must know the form of the good, but Socrates then says that he can't say what it is. He refuses to say what it is. And then he says, is it right for someone to talk about what he does not know as if he did? And later he will say, and this explains this a bit more, later he will say that as this is the source of knowledge and the source of being, but it is itself both beyond being and beyond knowledge. And so it's unknown. If it is in principle unknown and unknowable, then how can he say what it is? How can he even know it? So there's like big contradictions going on here in this kind of mystical, heightened essence of all knowing. And then he also says that if he does try to say what it is, then he's at risk of just giving an opinion. And remember, opinion is a mixture between halfway between ignorance and knowledge. So there's the risk that he will pretend to say it and then not say it. So if you like, in other places, it's like talking about an idol of the thing and not the thing itself. Then Glaucon protests and says, for heaven's sake, Socrates, don't stop when you're nearly at the end. And Socrates relents and says, well, I can't really tell you what it is, but I can tell you what the offspring of the good is and what it resembles most closely. And so then this is the introduction to the section where he uses the analogy of sunlight, and if you like, enlightenment. And this is a very powerful analogy in our tradition, because if you think of the word enlightenment and how it is kind of deep-seated in our tradition as an expression for mystical knowing or whatever, in a very important way, it does come from this section of the Republic, actually. So, in summary, good governance of Plato's ideal state will be ensured if its philosopher rulers have a clear view of absolute goodness. There's a lengthy program that aims to turning the mind's eye to see it clearly. In this way, the allegorical account is introduced to discuss to the discussion as an attempt to show the object of this education, the form of the good. To see it is to know reality at its source. So the allegory is supposed to guide you into seeing this reality, but not actually expressing it explicitly. So in the beginning of the analogy, he points to the sense of sight as being a very important sense. And the visible world is lit by the sun god. And so the sun god plays the role of the supreme divinity in this analogy, which can be expressed simply, as I've got on the screen, just as the sun is to things visible to the eye, so the good is to invisible forms seen by the mind's eye. Just as the sun gives the ability to see things, so the good gives the ability to see the forms. Plato expands on this imagery to introduce a geometric proportion in the line. So a line of arbitrary length is cut into 2 equal parts, and then each segment is divided again in the same ratio. This gives 2 pairs of segments in the same ratio on each side of an initial division to support the analogy. So the analogy is, and I'll just say it now and then I'll show you the line, just as shadows of visible things, shadows and reflections in a lake or something are to visible things, just as shadows are to visible things, so geometric diagrams are to forms. And here's just one way of drawing the line. There's a few ways we can draw it, but this is one example. So there's the big division in the middle, and then the same division by the same ratio on each side. So on my left-hand side, I have images of things. Images of things are to sensible objects as mathematical images, so the geometric figures, are to the insensible mathematical forms. Okay, and we're asked first to consider how things are resembled by their shadows and reflections. So if we think about how we look at we can say we look at a photograph if you like, but if you look at a reflection in a lake, or you look at the shadow of a tree or something else in sunlight, and then think about what that's relationship with sensible objects, then that's the same as what a mathematical diagram is to the form itself. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. So if you just think of, I've just put up here a mathematical diagram. Now in the last course, I think we mentioned in the memo how Plato gave an example of knowledge as remembering. And this was where he asked an uneducated slave boy to follow a few instructions, and basically demonstrated pretty much the principles behind Pythagoras' theorem. And so it's a sort of diagram like this, which now when you look at a diagram like this, think about it in terms of like, it could be written in pencil, it could be on your screen in Zoom, it could be very large, it could be as large as the pyramids, or it could be as small as a virus. But the principles of Pythagoras' theorem, or the principles of what's going on here, will all operate no matter in what way it is expressed. So this is where he's saying geometric diagrams are to the forms, the form of them, the invisible form, the form of if you like, what's going on in principle here, just like images of things are to visible things. Okay, so maybe it says, what about if there's any questions about that? Let me take some questions on that. Oh, Angus.
I'd love to see that again. I didn't have a chance to take a photo of it.
Oh, right, okay. Oh, well, maybe I can send it to you. It's just, can I see, can I see everyone if I share the screen? I'm not smart enough to do that. I'll share it again, yeah. Okay. Now, I'll just, this is, I was just going to take you to a bit of an advanced version of that, but this is the basic diagram. It can be done in a slightly different way as well. Can everyone hear me? I can't see if can everyone hear me? Can I get a yes?
Yes, we can hear
Oh,
you.
good. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So, any questions about this analogy?
Yeah, Bernie, I didn't really get why the proportions were that important. Why is it important that it's cut in that particular way as relates to the things that it represents, like the images of things and sensible objects?
Yeah, well, I'm going to get to that, and that's quite interesting. So it's really, there's different layers in answering that question. But one of them is just to say, well, it's a bit like when we were talking last time, I think, about a continuous ratio where you've got mother is to daughter, daughter is to mother as mother is to grandmother, and the relationship is mothering. And you might say in the double ratio, 1 is to 2 as 2 is to 4, and the relationship is doubling. And so here, these ratios become important. So really, it's another way. Initially, it's just another way of expressing the equality of the ratios in this case. So the ratio of images of things to sensible objects is the same as the ratio of mathematical images to the forms, to the forms of those images.
But is there any relation between the sensible objects and the mathematical objects, seeing as they're the exact same value?
Yes, there is. Yes, there is. So let me go into that then. So what's interesting there is that no matter where you do the first cut of the line, if you do the next 2 cuts in the same ratio, the 2 middle terms will always be the same. So the sensible objects term and the mathematical images will always be the same length, no matter where you do your first divide. So long as you do the second 2 subdivisions in the same ratio, here I've done it in the double ratio. I think you can see by the dotted lines that they're in double ratio. If you do it in whatever ratio you do it in, and you do the second ratios, the sub-ratios in the same as the top ratio, then sensible objects and mathematical images will always be in the same length. And this actually suggests how you can reduce this analogy, because mathematical objects, mathematical images are sensible objects. And so he then moves on to say, well, all visible objects, all sensible objects are just like mathematical images. And so let me see if I can go on to the next screen there. So see how I've kind of compressed the line here, and I've put sensible objects and mathematical images in the same area because they are the same length. And then we can reduce it to say, and we can say this, maybe a lot of people will understand this if we just say this verbally. I mean, that's probably the easiest way to understand it. Just as images are to visible things, or shadows, images are to visible things, so visible things are to the forms. And here he uses, as I was saying, the geometric, what's called a geometric ratio or a geometric mean, or it's got various names, but basically it's like the series double that I've got at the bottom there. So just as 1 is to 2, so 2 is to 4, and 4 is to 8, and 8 is to 16, and so on. Now, there's another layer of interest in this ratio, because there was a lot of speculation for many years that the ratio isn't just any random ratio, that what Plato wanted to use was a very special ratio, which is the golden ratio. And for a long time, people speculated that this is supposed to be the golden ratio, and with evidence in the text that that's what he was referring to in a very cryptic way. And very recently, like last century, about, I think in the 70s, it was actually a really interesting cryptic reference to the golden ratio was discovered. And briefly, that is where, probably the easy way to explain it, if you got the text of the Republic and laid it out in one continuous line, so the text of the Republic was just on one line going, miles down the road, then if you cut it where the golden ratio cuts, then that will land you exactly where the discussion of the divided line is. So there's a reference there to the golden ratio. Now, why is the golden ratio important? The short answer to that is we'll have to run our sacred geometry classes to explain that. It's a very important ratio in the generation of things. And so you see it in nature a lot. You see it in flowers and in the structure of plants and shells and things like that. So the Pythagoreans and Plato were very interested in it, but it was a secret. You weren't supposed to mention it anywhere. You had to keep it a secret because it was kind of like a secret of the brotherhood. Okay. Any other? That was a big answer, David. Does that help?
It does help.
Yeah.
One more little question on that is, how is the visible world different to the images of things? I thought they were kind of similar. What's the distinction?
Okay, so if you think, if you go back to, can people see me? I don't know whether you can see me. If you remember my
Yes, we can see you.
Yeah, so remember, I don't know, in the very first class I said, Plato says, and then we'll get to this in the cave, that physical things are actually mere shadows of their formal essence, of their formal reality. So what Plato's saying here is that exactly this, that sensible objects, although they feel like they are the essence of reality, they feel more real than anything else. He's saying that they are just like shadows are to sensible objects, so sensible objects are to the forms, and the forms are what is real. Their formal essence is what is real.
So what's the difference between a sensible object and an image of a thing?
Okay, so what's the difference between you seeing me on this screen and you giving me a hug?
Well, isn't it just a different sense?
No, but what's the difference between seeing a picture of a tree and the tree itself? This is what we're talking about in terms of, like, you say the image of the tree or the image of Bernie that you see on the screen is different from Bernie himself, right? It's just an image
So
of
seeing you on a screen is different than seeing you in real life.
no, than my real life, my real being.
But your real being isn't the sensible object. Your real being is the form.
Oh, okay.
Is that right?
Okay, no, I'm confusing you with the language. So, it's the difference between the image of me on the screen and the person who's sitting in the room,
Right.
in Brunswick or wherever. So it's that difference. So it's maybe movies and Zoom isn't a good example. Just think of painting a tree. So you sit down and paint a tree, and then there's the tree itself. So the tree represents. Now, the important thing here is, like, if you think of the geometric images, it's quite a good thing to think of, because think how the circle or the square that was drawn on my screen, right? Think how that is similar to the insensible form of it. But the insensible form of it is no particular expression of it. In the same way, we can all sit down in a drawing class and all draw a tree, right? That's standing over there in the field. But none of our drawings of the tree will be the tree itself. That's the way he's trying to make the analogy work, I think.
Okay. Does that include that category that includes the painting of the tree? Does that include a written description of the tree as well?
Written description. That's another step again. So this is where he discusses this in relation to the representational art. So he kind of says that's another step away again. When you get plays written that describe reality. That's hang on, yeah, that's another step away again. Instead of going towards the reality of the forms, you've got representational art, in this case in words, describing the tree or whatever, representing the sensible object, which itself only expresses its formal nature, its essential formal nature.
Mm-hmm.
Is that working?
Yeah, it's getting there.
Yeah, okay. So images, of course, images are a part of your visual world, right? So he's not saying they're not part of your visual world. So in some ways, the images sitting on my screen here, the image of the squares and the triangles, that's part of my sensible world. It's definitely the same in that sense, but he's trying to get the difference between a representation of something and the thing itself. So in the case of what he was talking about, it's a two-dimensional silhouette. Say a shadow is like a two-dimensional silhouette of the three-dimensional solid blah, blah, blah tree, or the image on the surface or the photograph, as we have now, is a two-dimensional representation of the actual three-dimensional thing. So that difference. What he's saying, what's different about the difference here is that the form in itself, the forms in themselves are insensible and in themselves kind of unknown. They're not really known in themselves. They can only ever be expressed. The form of the square can only ever be expressed by drawing a square or by making one out of stone or wood or whatever. Okay, anyone else?
Yeah, on the same topic. Sorry to draw it out a bit longer, but
No, that's fine. That's good.
I've read and been introduced to the cave before. It's a long time ago now, and just upon rereading it again, the very first thing that stuck out to me was sort of thinking, hey, the shadows are real. Like, there really is a lack of light on the wall that you see. And what if the slave turned around and said to Plato, well, the shadows are real, and the trees are the sort of the illusion here. And I think Plato's counter to that would probably be that the trees cause the shadows, right? Not the other way around. The shadows don't cause the trees. But then again, Plato's talking about this other unseen thing, which is unmoving and sort of like a shadow in a way, kind of perfect in its silhouette. I'm not sure. That was just me thinking for the last few minutes while Dave asked some important questions.
No, that's good. Well, I mean, the thing really is that the shadow is caused. What's the shadows caused by?
And what are the sensible objects caused by? Of course, going back to the form.
Yeah, right, and then you
There's-
go.
It's like chicken and egg, except it's quite defined which one is which. Or cause and effect, sort of like a parent and a offspring. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a parent and an offspring, because you've got the shadow and then the sensible things, and then the sensible things to the form of the sensible things. And then above that again is the form of the good, which is the sun itself. Okay, so, and that is moving ahead a little bit from where we are. So does anyone else want to ask anything about the divided line before we move on? I mean, the allegory of the cave is...
Yes.
Yes, go on.
When I was reading this, I was wondering if there's a relationship between the divided line and the and Perseus fighting Medusa, because if you looked at the image on the shield, the reflection, they were okay. But if they looked at the form, or maybe the real object, they would turn into stone. These things are written around the same time. I wonder whether that's just a coincidence.
I don't know. It sounds like the issue was coming up in various ways in Greek culture. I think, yes, you can see it there, and you can see it in the skeptics, the Eleatic skeptics, Parmenides as well. And yeah, I think it came up in various ways. And in mythology as well. I'd love to, if you can give me a reference to that, that'd be great. Sorry, you're on mute.
She's sitting next to me.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I want to look that up. Yeah. Oh, okay. Was that was that your question, Hume, or is that because Maria thinks she's asked too many questions? Okay, anyone else? Okay, does anyone else want to have a go at introducing the allegory of the cave? Anyone else want to have a go? Oh, come on, Effie, you want to have a go? Go on. All right. Okay, I'll do it off my off the top of my head and see how I go. All right, so so what have we got? We got a bunch of people sitting in a cave. There's a wide entrance behind them, but they are sitting facing a wall away from the entrance, and they're all chained down. They can't even turn their heads, and they're looking at the wall, and they're looking at shadows on the wall. And these shadows are formed by, behind them, there is a passageway, I think leading up to out of the cave. And there's people walking along there and talking and carrying statues and things and that sort of thing. Anyway, so they cast shadows because there's a fire behind them. So there's fire fire first, these people walking along like puppets, like shadow puppets, and then there's a high wall, and then there's the people sitting in a row just looking up as though it's projections of these shadows on the wall. And they take these shadows to be real. And they talk and they hear voices and everything, and they think it's the shadows talking, and they just think it's all real, and they can work out how to predict what shadow's going to come next and all that sort of thing. And they think they're pretty clever and pretty content with this situation. But then one of them breaks out of his manacles, or is taken out of his manacles, and stands up and turns around. And first of all, stunned by the light and everything, and then goes, yeah, he works it out, you know, like there's this fire up there, these people, you know, walking past, and that's reality. That's what's real. So yeah, I think at that stage he tells them, and they think he's ridiculous. Anyway, he then gets dragged out of the cave into the outside, into the sunlight, and he's blinded by the light. He's never been outside before. And so at first he can just see shadows and see the night sky, and eventually he can see the forms, you know, the trees or whatever. And so it progresses and progresses until when he's a real master, he risks the blinding light and looks at the sun. Okay, so the analogy here is similar to the divided line. So in the cave is the sensible world. So the images of things are the shadows on the wall, and the things themselves, sensible things themselves, the sensible things are what the people are carrying on the path behind that are reflected on the wall. And then up the top is the intelligible realm. I didn't mention this, but I mentioned it last time and it was on the screen. He uses a word that's translated as intelligible a lot, but sometimes people now leave it semi-untranslated. It comes from the Greek word for nous, or sometimes translated as mind, but a lot of people just say it's the noetic realm, so the intelligible or noetic realm, which is the realm of the forms, which is the natural place for the psyche. Okay, the psyche kind of belongs there. That's what Plato eventually says. And so so we've got the sensible world is represented as being inside the cave. Hi, Kula.
Hello.
We're
Lovely.
right in the middle of the cave. We're deep in the cave.
Oh.
We're deep in Plato's cave.
I thought I was never going to get away from that meeting.
All right, okay. So yeah, so sensible world is inside the cave, and those two things that are in the divided line between the images or the shadows and the sensible things are the shadows on the wall and the objects being carried back and forth along the path with the fire behind them. And then the noetic realm, the realm of the forms in themselves, is this higher outside. And so the analogy is that the sun is the form of the good. That's making all the forms visible to the mind's eye. Okay, so that's pretty much the landscape of it. It goes a bit further than that, but that's the landscape of it. Has anyone got any questions or comments about that? How did I do?
You've done well. Brilliant. Yeah. I just by reading a couple of things, when especially the first simile, the sun and knowledge, where he talks about the designer of the senses, and in the Greek word demiurgos, it could also be creator. and the site relating to the divine source, and now the mathematics and the examples. I just the image of William Blake's the Ancient of Days just came in my mind.
Is that the one where he's got the compass?
Yes,
Right,
exactly,
right.
exactly. I mean, it's just popped up. In this session, the word knowledge has like a number of ancient Greek words are being used or translated as knowledge. You mentioned mathema, it's episteme, gnosi, phronisi, and then the same for reason. Normally reason would be logos, but in this case there is also diania, it's quite interesting. And then moving into the dialectic and the hypothesis, yeah, that was a little bit tricky just to comprehend. This is also back in the divided line, I suppose. Yeah.
Okay, Maria, there's so much there. You notice that I said doxa, but I didn't say the word for knowledge because yeah, he uses so many words, and so I thought I'd put that one over you there, but obviously not.
Doxa as opinion, it's just not the way. It's just not what I always thought was the meaning of doxa. You know, we say doxa sio theos, which means
glory, isn't it? Glory to God. Doxa tho Theo.
Yeah, doxa sio theos. We
Maria,
say.
do you want to comment on that, Maria?
Sorry. Yeah, that's glory to God. So there is a different and philodoxia. It's there is another meaning. The pursuit of glory. You know.
Yeah, no, I'm just thought maybe you might want to talk about the ancient Greek word and the usage here, because often there's a few things going on. There's one is the ancient Greek meaning, and then there is what Plato's trying to do. So you think of sophists, you know, we think of sophists now. The reason sophist means, or sophistry means what it means, is because of Plato. So here, I guess, we probably need to just, I mean, it probably doesn't hurt too much, and correct me if I'm wrong, to just take Plato's meaning for what it is. What he's doing is...
I actually just Googled it, and in ancient Greek it means common belief or popular opinion. It's a different meaning in modern Greek.
Yeah.
Okay. And it certainly means that here, doesn't it? It means you know what, you know, most people think that this is actually what's real, not that it's a mere shadow of the true being, the insensible form. So opinion is opinion about what we're talking about now is common belief, and common belief amongst philosophers as well as amongst you know, non-philosophers. Because for us, Plato's view, as it was at that time, to most people, except maybe some mystics, some Orphean mystics and Pythagoreans, Plato's view was quite an extreme view, a long way from ordinary belief that most people valued and considered to be the truth.
And speaking of words, that there is another word. the word for belief, and again, when we're talking about, which is part of or a subdivision of the opinion of the visible things. I saw that in the ancient text is pisti, and pisti, yes, belief, but it's also faith, which I feel that it goes a little bit more. But yes, I mean, in this section is belief, not faith, like unquestionable as
yeah, because we use,
I suppose.
because we use belief in a different way, don't we? We sort of say, you know, we say, I believe in climate change or something, you know, like, what do you mean by that? We actually mean that I have a scientific basic for my blah, blah, blah. So we often use belief, not in the faith way. And of course, the other comment there, Maria, and I think we probably should, I don't know how much we want to get into the Greek language. We probably should leave it off a bit here, but what was I going to say? Oh yes, it's very important in early Christianity. That this distinction is very important. Do I say it right? Pisti,
yeah.
Pisti, yeah, very important. If you go and look at the Greek New Testament, it's critical there, and in Paul's letters as well, and the early fathers. But maybe, Maria, I will pick up on just one thing that, because we skipped over it, and that is the different sorts of knowledge you get in the different sections of that divided line. So the important one that we have discussed is where, and Maria mentioned a section which talks about dialectic that is very difficult to interpret, and he comes back to it a bit later after in next week's section, but it's very difficult, and I've certainly it's of great interest to me, actually. But what he's saying is that in the science that mathematicians do, with their odd and even numbers and with their squares and circles and everything like that, what they do, they start with sensible things and move to the forms. But what true dialectic does, through his technique of question and answer and discussion and honing in on definitions of things, in this sort of like definitions of the form of the island, and the definitions with opposites, the island and the sea, those sorts of definitions we're talking about. When he hones in on those sorts of definitions, that is dialectic in the extreme right side, where you're dealing only with forms. He says, you're talking about forms and dealing with forms. You're going from forms to forms, and that is where you can actually attain an image of the form of the good. So look directly at the sun, if you like. So this puts all the focus then on dialectic. What the hell is this method? And we'll go back to it next week when we get a bit more understanding of what dialectic is. Because what he does next week is he'll go through and say, well, what exactly is the education program for the philosophers? And he starts with mathematics, and then he actually starts with one and its opposite. And then out of that comes the numbers, and then comes geometry, and then comes plane geometry, and then comes solid geometry, and then comes the geometry of moving objects and basically astronomy. So there's this hierarchy in mathematical sciences, and then he comes back and says, well, actually, that's just a prelude to the main science, which is dialectic. And dialectic is just operating with forms, talking about forms, in this pure realm, in this noetic realm, and that's where you can rise up to the pure noetic realm and get a vision of the form of forms, the deity itself. Effie, you were laughing. Come on, tell me what you were laughing at.
Just the way you remarked, that was just the beginning. So.
No, it is quite funny, really, because you just sort of, you think, oh, wow, that's a big program of science. And then he just says, actually, it's just the prelude. He uses a music analogy and says, it's just, it's just the prelude. This is the symphony now. Okay, anyone else? How you going, Helen?
I was going to swear, but then I remembered your recording.
Oh, well, you can swear.
Oh,
You can swear
far out. Far out.
Why were you going to swear? What was there to swear about?
The whole thing.
Is it too much?
Yeah, but it's.
Well, someone said, Alexandra said it was the best part. Why is it the best part, Alexandra? You're on mute. You're on mute.
Because I'm more responsive to the poetic, to images, than to cerebral stuff. So it's much more accessible to me. I can understand things through images and allegories and analogies and things. Much easier for me.
Speaking of, Bernie, do you happen to have an image of what this cave analogy looks like? Because there are drawings of it.
Yeah, look, if you wanted to share one.
Yes, I just did a Google search while we were doing this.
Yeah, no, there are
a few good ones.
Lots of images. I just put a simple one up to show the shadow, but yeah, share what you've got.
Okie dokie. You keep talking and I'll I'll get the screen share ready.
I presume you have permission to do that.
Yeah, let's see.
You have technical permission. I hope so.
So Bernie, do you believe that the form of forms is God? Is the divine, or something else?
Well, that's a good question. Oh, here we go. Well, we'll just look at this image first. Oh, that's an interesting one. I haven't seen this one. It must be a very old one.
Yeah, it's hard to make out, but it's definitely the in my opinion, the sort of the coolest one, because it's very.
There's the fire.
Yeah. Oh, it's actually hanging from the roof there. Yeah. Now, there's a much more cartoony version that's actually a lot easier to understand, despite maybe not being as interesting.
Okay, I'll answer Maria's question.
Yeah.
Maria, kind of the historical context here, what is it? You've got a kind of overwhelming public culture of polytheism. Well, there we go, there's one. Okay, thanks, Angus. So you've got this polytheistic culture of Greek society, and then you've got various mystical traditions that seem to be moving towards some kind of monotheism. And then you've got Plato saying that his forms are divine, and then he has the... oh, Angus, can you turn your mute? I think for some reason you have a lot of static. I'm not sure what that is. Thanks for the image. No, it must be someone else. Okay. So Plato says the forms are divines, and then this is the form of forms. And then if we talk about it in terms of its influence on the subsequent tradition, this then does become a model for monotheism. Also, monotheism also in the sense of a certain type of creator, a formal creator. Like there's two types of creators in the Bible. There is Genesis 1, where you've got, and God said, let there be light and so on, and you've got that kind of creator. And you get a bit of that in the Timaeus. But this creator's more a formalistic one, where you start with unity and all difference emerges out of that as kind of negations from that, that original unity, but it's still contained within it. And so that's like John's Gospel, the beginning of John's Gospel. But these are just things that are familiar because they're in perhaps familiar because they're in Christianity. But this also emerges in Stoicism and in various other Hellenistic religions and philosophies. So does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. Yeah. Anyone else there? Actually, Angus, can you stop sharing your screen so I can see everyone, if that's all right? But that's a great image. That's a good one. It's got the circle. That's good.
Yep, I will stop the old
So
share.
it's got geometric things besides sensible, ordinary things like birds and things like that. So it's quite good. Yeah, anyone else? Okay, there's while you're thinking about that, there's a good section about this turning around stuff, which is 518D. And I'll just read you another translation. I'm not sure what you guys, what it says in this translation, but I'll just read you this one here. So he's talking about that actually this is an art to be able to teach this thing, and that it's not really about teaching a whole lot of content. It's just about teaching people how to see things in a different way. And so he says that it's an art, that of turning the soul around, how it will most easily and effectively be changed in direction. So the job, the thing that he's trying to solve, and I suppose the thing that a teacher of Plato is trying to solve, is how best to turn you around to see it in the Platonic way. So it's not so much about content. It's not about seeing better, if you like. It is about seeing better, I suppose, but the main thing is about a change of direction. It's not implanting the ability to see in the organ, the mind's eye, but devising a way of making the organ see, which already has vision, but it's not properly orientated or looking where it should. So in the analogy, this is looking at the shadows on the wall instead of turning around and looking at what causes the shadows, which is the forms. And whenever he goes to try to explain what's going on here, he comes back to mathematical forms. So we've often come back to the form of two. What is the form of two? He's used the form of geometric figures and that sort of thing. He's saying, well, the essence of things, the essence of all things, the way they're constructed and where they come from is the same place that where numbers come from. So it all comes down to that ultimately. And it's interesting to think about that in terms of where physics has got to in recent times. Okay, so any comments on that one? Turning around. Kula?
I have a question. Yes. With this turn of around and change of direction, I'd be interested to know whether the ancient Greek word is metanoia, which is the same in the New Testament. We inaccurately learn it as repentance, but it doesn't really mean that. It means a change of direction, a turn around, a change of looking at things in a different way.
That's right.
And I just wondered if there was an influence on Christianity from that particular part of the cave.
Yes, like
yes, Maria.
Metanoia. Is that what you're saying, Patricia Alexander?
Metanoia, I know it as, but I don't know what the correct Greek word is.
Yeah, yes, okay, so the Greek word here, we're getting back to the Greek again, is that actually, are we all into the Greek except Angus? Are you happy about us talking about the Greek, Angus?
Always, always.
Always, okay.
Yeah.
So I translate it as lead about, right? And the about word is a word that you see all the time, which is peri, as in perimeter. How do you pronounce that in Greek? Sorry, peri, I say, perimeter, peri.
Mhm.
Yep.
Very-
And so that's the about as in like physics is on nature. Peri, and then lead, the word for lead. It's alpha, gamma, omega. Does that mean anything? No? Okay. So in ancient Greek, it means lead,
Yes.
to lead.
Algon, yes. Yes,
Yeah.
it is to lead.
Yeah, to lead a dog or something or whatever.
Can you say it, Maria, so I can hear it?
Algon, algon.
So it's to lead about the soul. It's the art, so the technique, to lead about the soul, to turn the soul around. Yeah, to turn it about. But it's actually leading means that the teacher is trying to turn you around. Yeah, by leading. Okay. So that's maybe a bit different from the Christian Alexandra.
Yes, the word I know is metanoia, which is has been explained as turnaround, but it might be a newer word.
And what context was it used in? Can you explain that again?
Well, with John the Baptist, you know, it's translated as repent or whatever, but what he's actually saying is metanoia in the New Testament.
Which means something quite different, you think?
Yes, it's more subtle, that it's not repent in the way that it's become understood. It's more to have a complete change of heart and mind, a whole change of opinion, turn yourself around and look at things in a different way.
Medania, change of the mind, actually.
Yes, change the mind, open the mind.
As a meta after.
Does it have anything to do? Does it have anything to do with awakening? Is that ringing anything? Is that like the waking up to something, or?
Yes, it probably has overtones of that.
We say gnomi ke gnosi. Gnomi, that's noia. Gnomi ke gnosi. That means knowledge and understanding. Gnomi ke gnosi. So we say metanoisi. Does that mean after a sort of a turnaround of your thought, of your knowledge, turning around your knowledge?
Well, this would be. I don't think it's being. It's interpolating here, but it's turning around your mind's eye. So it's turning around the direction you look, which is in a way kind of, perhaps you could say, opposite to the direction that your physical eye looks, looking in the other direction.
Looking inwards instead of outwards.
Yes, that's right.
I just Googled it, and it says beyond thought, meta thought in the ancient Greek. Is that?
This is the Christian word, yeah.
The metania is like beyond, meta, nous or near, beyond thought.
So that's Effie, that comes very close to Plato. That's interesting.
That's the ancient Greek, yeah.
Yeah, that comes very close to Plato, because this is the kind of the contradiction in what he's saying here, right? Where there's actually a statement a bit further on, which you might miss, but it's really important in the tradition, where he says that the form of the good is beyond being. So he's saying the form of the good doesn't exist. He's also saying the form of the good is unknown. So there's a whole question in terms of like having a philosophical discussion or having a teaching that where the ultimate reality in it and also the ultimate knowledge in, let's be careful what word we use, but the ultimate wisdom is being aware, or whatever we want to say, this that is unknowable and doesn't exist. So that's where this section gets really tricky and kind of, you know, like all these mystic Platonists and Christians and go right into kind of spend their whole time in this space. Right. Ah, I need a drink. Yeah, no.
Oh, join you. Oh, cheers.
Cheers.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, any other questions about the allegory of the cave?
Actually, just on the topic of ancient Greek words, I'd love a really good either website or actual book to get good definitions of them all in one place. That'd be great, because I'm getting them from different sources, but it's a bit annoying to go to.
It's called Little and Scott. I'll get you them.
You want physical books? I don't know, Bernie.
Mine's lost its cover.
Yeah.
Here it is, mine.
Uh-huh.
Oh,
This is what us non-Greek speakers have to use.
Yeah, I'd love an ancient Greek dictionary.
Yeah, I got a spare one. I got a spare
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Who's the editor or author of that
Oh,
one?
it's Little and Scott is the standard English one.
Oh, right.
Little and Scott.
Little. Oh, okay.
Yeah, Little. Yeah.
Thanks.
I would settle for a digital version of that if it exists.
Not sure. Not sure. It might keep the copyright close to hand. But yeah, no, you could. Yeah, it's tricky. You can't use Google Translate for ancient Greek, unfortunately.
Just did. I just put the word in and then put ancient Greek and got a few of them.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Right. Okay. In Google Translate or in Google?
Just in Google, I put the word as it sounds, and then I put ancient Greek, and then it came up with it.
Yeah, definitely, because there's always discussions and lexicons and things like that. So, cooler.
there you go. Lexi. There you go. I don't know if it's back the front, but that's an ancient Greek dictionary with the words that were used in the Iliad.
And that's Homeric language. That's also a little bit different to the language of Plato.
Yeah.
Look, and so is the New Testament.
Yeah.
And you know, like in a way, the Athenian dialect was something in itself too. So it can be tricky. Some of the spellings of some of the basic words are different.
Yeah.
In my ignorance. But anyway, let's move away from that.
I'd call you anything but ignorant, Bernie.
Okay, so the last thing I wanted to say about this is that, remember, I think at the end of this reading, it's where there's that issue of, again, so the philosopher goes up and gets enlightened. Why would they ever come down again? And so it goes back to this thing again, that it's very important that we take the philosopher up there, we turn them around, we take them out of the cave, we get them to see the sun, but then it's their duty to come back down, to readjust to the light in the cave, you know, the darkness in the cave, and then to lead the people. So it's this, you see this in other mystical traditions too, where there's all this talk about in the world mysticism, where it's very important to come back and be in the world and engage with people and be a teacher, if not a philosopher leader. Okay, so I think I've already introduced next week a little bit already, and that's where we dive straight into in the next section, which comes directly after this one. So there's no gap here, which is the education of the philosopher, where we go through these different levels of mathematics, and then we get into dialectic. So pay attention to where he's talking about the number one and the fingers. Just remember that, one and fingers, pay attention to that. And then pay attention to what Maria brought up earlier, which is towards the end when he talks about the dialectic. Now, it's all difficult. The dialectic stuff is actually really difficult, but you know, see what you think about it and come back with some questions, and we can talk about it next week. All right. So any last questions or comments?
I managed to track down the Greek English lexicon by, as you said, Henry George Liddell or something. Is that what you have there, the Greek English lexicon?
That must be Alice's father, Liddell.
Oh, I think it might be. Oh yes.
Yes,
He was the
classic scholar. He was the dean of Christ Church.
That could be right. But Angus, I had to say, but some of our colleagues in this class, our fellow students, they might be reading Greek. They might go to the Greek, ancient Greek dictionary rather than the English ancient Greek, I guess, as in Kula does. Yeah. But for us, yeah, and we can chat about the words for sure. It's fascinating. All right. So anything else?
Can I just ask Angus, is that in iBooks or Kindle or something like that, the dictionary?
Yeah, great question.
Available at Amazon.
Amazon.
Cool. I just found an online version, which is on archive.com. So
oh, right.
It took me a while to find. I might email to you, but yeah, that won't be an ebook form, but at least if you have a laptop or a computer,
thank you very much.
You can look at it. Yeah, cheers.
What was Alexandra's question about Amazon?
Just if the little dictionary was an ebook on Kindle, Amazon, or iBooks, Apple.
Well, you know, this is just totally away from what we've been talking about. But many of us carry 20% DNA, which is written as Caucasus. And I sort of have a fantasy that we still carry Amazon DNA.
I looked up
because the Amazons actually originated in the Caucasus,
that's right, they did.
Black Sea region.
Yeah.
And I sort of have this fantasy, oh look, yes, we still carry Amazon DNA, because there was a total integration with the Hellenes, the Amazons and the Hellenes, over a 200-year period. Well, that's just beside everything.
Well, Kula, I'm sure, I'm not sure about myself, but I'm sure you do. I'm very confident of that. Okay, one final thing that I have to mention is on the website, I put up I don't know whether anyone have a look, so the most recent blog on the main page, you'll see some links to a podcast which is called The Secret History of Western Esotericism. And it has some fascinating stuff on there. I know Maria's interested in early Christian Platonism. There's some good stuff on that. But I put the links particularly to where they talk about Plato's Republic and this thing I mentioned where they've recently worked out that the divided line discussion occurs right at the point in the dialogue. If you like, pretty much if you divided the book if you divided the book into on the golden mean, the ratio called the golden mean, and you opened the page, you'd open the page on the divided line discussion. Which also, when I reread The Republic recently, and there's these sudden inserts of the discussion of women, and there's this sudden insert about this thing, and something, I've now started to imagine, there's Plato. Oh, I haven't got it quite right, so I'll put these extra few passages in here so that I can get it right into the right place. But anyway, Secret History of Western Esotericism. But I've got the links on the website, so you can find that there, and you can also find links to book the new sessions, the sessions on starting on September the 9th, for where we're doing Platonic love. So the Phaedo and the Phaedrus and the Symposium. And I'm just encouraging with that early because we have this problem with, if you want to order the books, we need a good lead time to sort the books out. All right, so we're right on time, and I'm going to turn the recording off so that